I'm here at Automate, which is North America's largest robotics and automation trade show. Super excited to have Dr. Scott Walter with me. He's an expert with robotics and manufacturing, so I'm really excited to review some of the things with robotic hand movement. There's a lot of innovation here at this show, and we are right now at the Psionic booth, and I want to learn a little bit about this myself, so I'm just going to start out open-ended. What has your experience been here, Scott, at the show, and what would you have to say about Psionic?
Okay, so John, thank you for having me on. One of the last times we met, or actually the first time we met, we had a test drive in a Model 3 with Jordan Giesecke of the limiting factor. Very memorable. So yeah, we're here in McCormick Hall, and as I've told everyone in the past when we talk about robotics, the business end of the robot is the hands. So without the hands, you can't actually do any work. You can do backflips, you can do a lot of things. The whole point of the humanoid is to get the hands to where they need to be. So you need to work on that. And for the past several years, the go-to hands that a lot of humanoid companies have used are the hands from Psionic. And now coincidentally, they are also prosthetic devices, and they can also be used on robots. And that means that there's some interesting cross embodiments that can happen here, because there's robot training, which is a problem. You need to get the data. And a lot of times people are doing it with data gloves and everything else. Psionic opens up an interesting opportunity of being able to grab it with the same hand that can actually be used by people who are amputees to be able to capture data. And so behind us, Dale is wearing this, and all his motions we'll be able to see over here. They're getting streamed. So as you can see, when Dale is making the movements there, everything gets captured. Absolutely everything gets captured.
Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Love it. So this is a prosthetic that it looks like you're using on a regular basis, is that right?
Yeah, so I wear this every day. It's integrated into my life. It gives me that added dexterity that I need to do my day-to-day tasks, and it's it really helps as far as just being able to take some of that load off of this side of my body, or be able to do things in a coordinated way.
Wow, that's fantastic. How do you control it?
Yeah, so I can show you here. So I use my muscles, and there's these two sensors in here that sit on the surface of my skin, and they detect when I'm flexing the muscle, and it sends a little electrical impulse up to my hand and allows it to control.
Okay, so John, we just met Dale. Now let's meet a Dale. I got you.
You can't spell a deal without Dale.
Okay, it's kind of like that. I am known for the dad jokes. And you are also known for the dad jokes.
I am also known for the dad jokes.
Especially when it comes to hands, stuff like that. So we just saw a hand there, actually as a prosthetic device. We are now seeing one over here. Okay, so through the magic of editing, we're moving around because they are disassembling everything here. Indeed. Because literally we've used every minute of this trade show, and we're going extra time, aren't we?
Exactly, that's how we do it.
Tell us the story.
Yeah, so I've been wanting to build bionic limbs since I was 7. My parents are from Pakistan. I was visiting, and that was the first time I met someone missing a limb. She was my age, missing her right leg, using a tree branch as a crutch. That's what inspired me to go into the field. And so yeah, since then I ended up getting a bachelor's degree in biology from Loyola Chicago, where I was a student of your best friend. And so I got a bachelor's degree in biology there, a master's in computer science, taught there for a couple of years. Then went to the University of Illinois, got another master's in electrical and computer engineering, PhD in neuroscience. I left medical school to do this because this was more fun. But we started building the limbs while I was doing my PhD at the University of Illinois. We went down to Ecuador, where we were working with a nonprofit there, and we met our very first human user. Juan Soquillo lost his hand 35 years prior, and he made a pinch with his left hand for the first time in 35 years with an early prototype of the hand.
Yes.
And he said that he felt as though a part of him had come back, and that's when I realized if I stay in academia, this just ends up as a journal paper. If we want everyone to feel the same way as Juan, we have to commercialize the technology, and that's when Psionic was born.
Where does the name come from, besides the fact it's really cool?
What we did is, while I was doing my PhD, we mixed psychology and neuroscience research with bionics, but Psionic also means to control things with your mind, and that's what we're doing, right?
Okay, okay. Now, when it comes to robotic hands, everyone is trying to figure out what's the best number of degrees of freedom, exactly what kind of gestures you want, and it seems like there's a whole range, a whole spectrum of what you have. So you have to identify the use case really well. You've already had experience doing that way before people were actually thinking of having robotic hands.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is that our human users have figured out and adapted on how to do all these different tasks with the hand. So in the home, from doing like folding laundry to washing dishes, to, some of the tasks that you've done, you've taken it to the gym, you've like done, 100-pound kettlebell swings with it.
This number keeps going up every time he tells us.
Okay.
It's like a fishtail, right?
Yeah.
It's
like my bench press too.
I think it actually was around 90, but
Okay, it's 90. Okay,
I'll
90.
take the 100. I'll take the 100.
Look at these muscles. That's pretty good, right? And so, but you play baseball. Like you took it to the batting cages and you swung the baseball bat with it as well too, right? But then also industrial things like pick and place, stocking shelves. You were using an eyedropper with it. Like you were doing pick and place with like Twinkies.
Now this goes to a thesis I have. First of all, if you're going to be building a hand, it has to be durable.
Oh, for sure.
It has to be absolutely robust.
Yep.
And when you're building something which is a prosthetic, this is medical grade.
Yep.
That's the first thing.
Absolutely.
Which means it has to be able to survive dirt and moisture, get wet, everything else.
Exactly.
So already you check one of the boxes that you'd want to have for a robotic hand, which actually a lot of robotic hands don't have that. They don't have the IP protection they need. The other thing is that when it comes to degrees of freedom, sometimes people overthink it. I feel that dexterity lies more in the head than it does in the hand.
Exactly.
I think, Dale, you're kind of proving that. You are able to do a lot of things. A lot of people say, you can't do that. And you show them wrong every day. So it really just comes down to making sure you get the right degrees of freedom. You get that in there, you can do quite a bit with it. And then the robustness comes in. Because we cannot design the mechanical systems to be as good as this yet. Someday we're going to get there.
Exactly.
We all know we're going to get there. But before we get there, maybe we have to do one step at a time.
And even when we went to NASA in February, you were able to do tasks that they were struggling to get the robots to do, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. The things that I do on a day-to-day basis that maybe are slightly modified, because like you're saying, we're not replicating every degree of freedom. That you might have to do it in a slightly modified way, but if you're stubborn enough, you'll find a way to figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah, and that's the whole point, and that's the stubbornness that AI can also do as well. So my belief is you are able to prove it, and they say, you can't do it with that hand, we can't get a robot to do it. It's like, that's a skills issue, okay?
Exactly.
So let's go over and actually see, can you do it with a hand? And when you demonstrate that, they'll begin to realize, okay, maybe we don't need that extra degree of freedom. Maybe we just have to think about the problem a little bit differently.
And honestly, what it comes down to for us is we see it as a data issue, right? Because the skills haven't been taught, and because our human users have been able to do all these tasks, we can have our human prosthetic users train the robots by taking the data generated from their hands and teaching the AI to do it.
I can't believe you missed my little AI pun there.
Oh my goodness!
It is kind of a skills issue, right? Because there is skills, but when it comes to the implementation of the data, the brains, that is a skill issue. It hasn't been done right yet. It can be done right.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I have a question regarding your display here on the table. Is this different from what is being worn here?
It's the same exact hand. It's just attached to a different embodiment. So I'm wearing a prosthetic arm. We've got a robotic arm here, and it's exactly the same.
And that's unique because there's always some data loss between wanting to do data capture with a data glove. It's not exactly the same thing as the hand that you're putting on the robot arm. So literally, it's the same. There is no transfer issue between the two.
When we call that reel-to-reel transfer, so instead of there being a sim-to-reel gap, there is not anymore because it's going from the real hand on a real human to a real hand on a real robot.
Now, most people who are doing the data capture, it's maybe a couple hours a day. In theory, you're capturing 24/7. As long as he's wearing it, using it, you're getting real data.
Or at least during the waking hours.
Yeah. In theory, yeah. So what that means, it opens up the possibility of grabbing more data, a more rich data set, because in many cases...
And in unstructured, unplaned environments.
Exactly, because a lot of times, most of these environments are very contrived.
Yep.
We try to pretend you're doing something like this, and you're not really doing it. You're not doing it with the way a real skilled person would do it.
Yep.
But you're doing it with an actual goal in mind, that I want to achieve this. I want to make something because I'm actually going to consume it, as opposed to, I'll put something together that looks like a sandwich, but no one would want to eat it, right? So these are the things that I think are kind of important, that the quality of the data has to be good.
So I'm sure you've encountered several challenges along the way, software and hardware related. Has there been one pivotal moment that really kind of changed your technology?
Yeah, you know, when we were, this is the 9.5th generation of the hand over the last 10 years, right? And when we first started building the hands, we were fully 3D printing these out of like, you know, hobbyist 3D printers and like PLA and ABS, like the plastics. And we were like, we can build a bionic hand now for like $500. This is going to like change everything. And then when we started talking to actual like potential users of the hand, the number one thing they complained about was that their $50,000 injection molded custom machine steel hand was breaking within like a month of using it. And we were like, well, if we give them a 3D printed hand, they're going to break this within a day of using it. So we had to figure out how could we still leverage the low cost of 3D printing, but make this hand more robust than anything else that's out there. And so we turned to soft robotics. So these fingers are compliant and flexible. There's a flexible 3D printed bone inside of here. And then we used to use 3D printed molds and inject silicone in them. Now we use polycarbonate, so it's more sturdy. We can scale that much more easily. But I can take this, I can smash this, and it survives the impact. You've broken like over 100 wooden boards at this point.
And zero knuckles.
And zero knuckles.
Whoa. Whoa.
Yeah. And these are the things that are important, right? Understanding what our user needs are, both on the human side and the robotic side, and they're honestly very similar on both ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been very informative. There's a lot of technology at this show. If you've never been to the Automate trade show, it's going to be in Las Vegas next year. It's been in Detroit and Chicago, but Las Vegas is the place to be in 2027. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, dude.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Appreciate it.
Keep building.
See you guys.